Welcome to the Up Podcast, raw real talk on everything young parenting.
From self-care, co-parenting, and family planning, to balancing school, work, relationships, and goals.
Together, we're challenging society's assumptions and building a safe and supportive community for young parents.
One honest conversation at a time. So join us on the journey.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Up Podcast on all things young parenting. Today we have a very special guest diving into all things young fatherhood. And as always, to introduce myself, I'm Divine.
And it's Brandy. And yes, today we have Chris Brown, and he is incredible. He does incredible work in the fatherhood space and mentorship, and he's going to really help us understand what fatherhood looks like in the landscape of it today, especially young fatherhood, and help us to understand how we can better support young fathers across the country. So without further ado, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear a little bit about you. So if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you do over at the Fatherhood Initiative and anything else that you'd like us to know.
You bet. So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's always an honor to be invited to share your expertise. I try to be humble about what I know around the issue of fatherhood. So, anytime somebody invites me on to a podcast, I'm truly honored. So my name is Christopher Brown. You can refer to me as Chris. I'm president of the National Fatherhood Initiative. We are a national nonprofit that focuses on building capacity in communities to help fathers to be as involved in the lives of their children as possible. And so we don't actually serve fathers directly. Instead, we serve the organizations that serve fathers. So we build the capacity of human service organizations, such as nonprofits, schools, correctional systems, healthcare providers, those types of organizations that interact with fathers and families on a daily basis to help them understand, how do you go about getting dads involved and engaged in the lives of their children? Because it's a little bit of a different challenge than it is to get mothers to engage. So we've been around since 1994, and we have thousands of partners across the country in local communities using our evidence-based and evidence-informed resources. So we have organizations that run our fatherhood programs, so they get groups of dads together to support one another and go through a specific curriculum that helps dads learn about things like child development, effective communication with their co-parent. How do you care for yourself as a father so you can adequately care for your children? And so these programs are run with groups of fathers, and then sometimes they're run individually, one-on-one in a mentoring capacity.
That's so awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. Your work is so important because, like you mentioned, it's not, educating parents is not just for mothers, it's for dads too. And it takes two to tango. So that is so important. You mentioned kind of being in this field for so long, and I'm kind of curious, what have you noticed being like the shift for fathers over these past couple of years? And would you say there are any like misconceptions that are held within fatherhood that you've noticed?
No, I don't think that there's necessarily a misunderstanding, but I think there's a lack of an awareness about really how committed that today's fathers are to being as involved in the lives of their children as possible. So there's some really good research that's been done by the Pew Research Center, fantastic research organization out of Philadelphia, that looked at, how do today's fathers, millennial, Gen Z fathers, for example, how do they see the importance of their role as a father as compared to older generations? And what they found was that today's fathers place much more of their personal identity, the sense of who they are, on their role as a father. So it doesn't mean that previous generations didn't, but today's generations see that role as being much more central to who they are, so that if they do a good job as a father, they feel like they are a much better person as a consequence of that. Um, we also have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of time that fathers spend with their children, and also help their co-parent to do things like, basic childcare and housework. So years ago, there used to be a huge gap between the amount of time that mothers spent doing childcare and domestic work and the time that fathers spent in those two pursuits. And now we've seen that gap narrow significantly in recent years. And part of that is economics, certainly, with the increase in the number of two income households in families. But there's something more at play here than just economics, and it has to do with this sense of personal identity being tied up into how effective a father is in raising his children.
Absolutely. I love that you brought in research because I think it's really important for us to understand. Sometimes when we see social media, we hear word of mouth from those in our communities. We hear it paints a very different story than kind of what the literature and what the research is actually showing. And I feel like oftentimes fatherhood is kind of looked at in this vacuum, and it depends on one's experience with the father of the child or the fathers in their lives or whatever it is. But the reality is that we're seeing that there is this shift, and nobody's really talking about it. And so I think it's really important for us, especially here at Yup, to celebrate fatherhood, because our program is for mothers and fathers. We want to make sure that the misconceptions that society has about fatherhood, that we debunk some of those things and destigmatize what it means to be a loving and present and amazing father, like we know a lot of young fathers want to be. And so you mentioned about this shift, one about the involvement of fathers, across the board. But we also previously talked about even a shift in fathers asking for help or accessing resources. And I know years ago it was always said that, you know, fathers, especially young fathers, come back to resources later on. And so that's why we're not seeing a lot of them in these programs that are for teen and young fathers. And so can you speak to what you think or what you're seeing in the research has contributed to this shift?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me share that we're now at a 34-year high in the proportion of children growing up with their father in the home. So starting in 1960, we started to see a rapid rise in the proportion of children growing up without a father in the home, and the Black community was most negatively affected by that. But now we've seen a reversal in that trend, and in fact, what's driving that trend is the return of Black fathers to the home. So uh, that 34-year high has resulted in a 15% a higher proportion of Black children growing up with fathers in the home, and this is just really encouraging. So I think that one of the things that's kind of driving this change is just sort of an evolution in the relationship between masculinity and fatherhood. So one of the reasons why our programs are so effective, and research has shown this, is because these programs are designed specifically for dads in the way that dads parent, and it helps them to address the challenges that are unique to being a father as opposed to being a mother. There are certainly things that all parents need to do effectively, such as understanding how to discipline children effectively and how to communicate with your co-parent effectively. But for example, one of the things that's unique and different for men is the fact that we are raised with a certain model of masculinity, and this is cross-cultural, that indicates that if you reach out for any kind of assistance, that it's a sign of weakness. In other words, you're less of a man if you reach out for help. We're starting to see that model evolve to being much more accepting of reaching out for help. So one of the things that I'm sure you all have noticed, and the young parents out there have noticed, is that there's more of a willingness of people to be transparent about seeking help for their mental health, for example. So you have a lot of celebrities and influencers and social media talking much more about doing that, and that includes men. And so this bleeds over into help seeking in other areas as well. Generally speaking, when men have interacted with one another in social groups, it's been primarily for the exchange of material goods and information. It hasn't been centered around being emotionally intimate with each other like you see with women, where they may talk about their children, they may talk about the challenges around parenting. We're seeing men being more and more willing to do that. And this is one of the reasons why our programs are so effective, is because for many men, it's the first time that they've been able to come into a safe place and to be emotionally intimate with other men and talk with men who understand the challenges that they're going through, and they can start to explore that within a peer-to-peer support environment. So I think a lot of those developments in that kind of evolution in the model of masculinity that men are growing up with today have contributed to the greater willingness for men to seek help, generally speaking, but certainly for fathering and parenting as well.
Wow, that's so deep. So, outside of some of those emotional challenges, as far as like navigating masculinity versus fatherhood and manhood, and just kind of having those spaces to talk out loud, once given that opportunity to, uplift one another's voices, what are some of the challenges that they express that they're navigating? And what does that look like, compared to more traditional age fathers?
Sure. So, there's really kind of two buckets, if you will, of challenges. There's the bucket that all dads face, challenges they all face, regardless of their age. And so these are relevant for young fathers, such as, how do you effectively discipline your children? When we look at the type of information that men seek out, that's one of fathers seek out. That's one of the things that comes top of mind is how do you effectively discipline your children? And then depending upon, of course, the age of your children, there are certain challenges that are associated with, raising children of specific ages and also specific genders. How do you raise a boy effectively? How do you raise a girl effectively? And what are some of the differences around that type of thing? But when we talk about young fathers, one of the challenges that many young fathers face, particularly when we're talking about teenage fathers, is the challenge around once you have a child, how do you effectively navigate staying in school and trying to support your child financially, not to mention emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually as well. There's also the challenge that these fathers often face around the involvement of the mother's parents, so the grandparents of the child, who are often involved because of the maturity level of the parents. So they may engage in what is called gatekeeping behavior. So one of the challenges that many fathers face, and this is whether fathers are, living with their children, romantically involved with the co-parent or not, or living apart, is what's called gatekeeping behavior, where the co-parent, the mom, controls access of the father to his child. And so you often have, with very young fathers, additional gatekeepers as well. And this may be, as I mentioned, the parents of the mom. So you've got this kind of triple whammy of, how do you stay in school? How do you get gainful employment so you can support your child financially? And then how do you navigate the different relationships with the parents of the mom, and maybe even the father's own parents, who feel the importance of stepping in to help the young parents raise their child?
Yeah, you bring up a really, really great point because we have a lot of content on Yup about parenting while also being parented. And it adds this other layer of complexity for young parents across the board where they're trying to exercise their independence and trying to figure out what parenthood looks like, and trying to figure out, even for dads, this tension between manhood and fatherhood, and what the overlaps are, and what are the things that um, that differ between the two of those. And on top of all of that, they have their parents or their partner's parents or their co-parents' parents also chiming in, and maybe grandparents and maybe even school systems or organizations or whatever it is, telling them, here's how you should parent, here's what you should be looking for, and it just adds so much extra when they're just trying to figure themselves out.
It does. And you've got, physiologically speaking, as you may know, men develop physiologically on a later timetable than girls and women do. And so, but when these young dads are having children, their brains are still developing. And so they have the challenge of just being physiologically mature as well that they're dealing with. And so it's not until, the early to mid 20s that the male brain is fully developed. So, the challenge of, understanding, actions and consequences and those types of things is still being, worked out in their own minds. So you've got, as you pointed out, just a lot of added complexity and in different relationships that you have to navigate, in addition to, as you mentioned, being told by various people and systems what to do, and that you are not old enough to make those decisions for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I want us to look at I feel like we've been spending a little bit of time, which is great, just really understanding what the landscape of fatherhood looks like today. And and I want us to continue to talk about that, but I also want to kind of shift to see what are some things that are working. Early on you talked about like support, you talked about groups, you talked about organizations implementing certain curriculum and programs and things like that to support young fathers. But what are the things that bring the young dads into the door, right? What are the things that organizations can do? How can they create a space that feels welcoming and empowering and doesn't feel stigmatizing and judgmental? Because I feel like, as somebody who implements a program, right, sometimes just getting folks in the door is the hardest part because they don't know what they're going to get. They don't know if it's going to be just like, what it was like when they were out at school or in the workplace or whatever that is. And so, do you have tips and tricks for organizations for effectively engaging young dads in meeting their needs?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd encourage people to go to our website, fatherhood.org, because we have lots of free resources around what we call recruitment and retention. So one of the biggest challenges with fathers of any age, and this is certainly true with young fathers, is to effectively recruit them into fatherhood programs. And then once they're there, to retain their participation, because just because they show up once, Divine and Brandy, doesn't mean that they're going to show up again. So you have to have, just like any product or service, you have to have great customer service. You have to have something of value that speaks to, in this case, young fathers, that will keep them coming back session after session in order to get the full impact of the program. But one of the things that's a bit counterintuitive for a lot of folks to understand in terms of what's effective in terms of getting fathers to come into fatherhood programs is that oftentimes the hook is not, how do you be a better dad? It's, hey, this is how we can help you get your GED. This is how we can help you be gainfully employed to support your child and your family. This is how we can help you with other what we call wraparound needs that, while they impact a young father's ability to be involved in the lives of his children, are sort of have an indirect impact. It's often not until the father comes in and starts to experience the program that he starts to become intrinsically motivated. And this is one of the things that is really important to understand when you're trying to recruit any population to come into a program or service, is the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So you can often get people in the door with incentives that are outside of themselves. In other words, these are things that are not from within them, not a drive or a motivation, but an incentive like money or the ability to, get your GED or something like that. But it's often not until they're in the program that they start to realize the value that it has, and that motivation becomes intrinsic. And that's the other thing that's really important for keeping fathers engaged, is understanding for each and every father what is his individual motivator or set of motivators for being involved, and being able to help him meet those motivators. Yeah, so it's really important for programs to use imagery that helps fathers identify with the other fathers that they're going to encounter when they come into the program. And that means as you have success with young fathers, start to recruit them as ambassadors for your program so that they can start to vouch for and even maybe do recordings or live presentations or whatever it happens to be, going into classrooms, for example, and recruiting other young fathers to participate in the program, because that's really important. But one of the things that is also important, I wouldn't necessarily talk about this in marketing a program, but one of the dynamics that we see with our fatherhood programs is the value in having fathers of different ages, the fathers themselves. So having very experienced fathers along with younger fathers. Because what ends up happening inevitably is that the younger fathers, after they become comfortable with the notion of, gosh, I can be helped by an older father, they start to ask some questions. And the older fathers love mentoring the younger fathers. So one of the things that people sometimes initially think is, oh, I've got to segment the dads that I'm working with. So, maybe I need to have, only older fathers in one group and younger fathers in another. And I always argue that I think that can work and that can be helpful depending upon your situation, but it keeps you from having that wonderful dynamic of the younger fathers learning from the older fathers. Because what we also find, particularly with young fathers who have lacked a good father role model or male role model in their own life, is that they're hungry for this type of mentorship. And oftentimes it's not until they get into a fatherhood group that they receive that mentorship. And then when they're there, it's like a person in the desert who's come upon an oasis, and they're so thirsty that they just continue to drink and drink and drink from that water source.
Yeah. A lot of what you said really makes sense when saying it out loud, especially as far as maybe young fathers who have lacked that role in their life to really receive and reflect off of what it looks like to be a father. I know from my experience and some of the mothers in the program, it's a little bit different when comparing ourselves to more traditional age parents. So it's kind of interesting to hear that difference that young dads have with being hungry for older um, guidance. Because I know with a lot of our mothers, it can kind of seem disconnecting, like we're just not on the same level. And so I'm wondering, do you guys witness any transformations in like the peer connection of just young fathers being among one another in that sense? Like what difference do
Yeah,
you?
one of the things that we sometimes see is that young fathers, particularly teen fathers, can posture when they
Mm,
get into a group, meaning that they put on a mask. And a lot of us do this, right? I mean, when we get into an environment with people that we don't know, we put on a mask and we act a bit differently. But for many young fathers, and particularly depending upon the situation that they come from, they feel like they have to put on a mask because there's a lot of pain that they've experienced, and they may have had a lot of trauma in their lives. And so what they do is they put on this mask of, hey, I'm a man, I can handle it, I don't need help. And they're doing that because they want to keep people away from the pain
mm,
of the trauma that they've experienced. They don't want to have to relive that trauma. But as a consequence, they're not dealing with the trauma.
Mm.
So one of the things that we really encourage our partners to do is to get trauma-informed training, because most of the fathers who enter our programs, regardless of their age, have experienced anywhere from what are called 2 to 3 adverse childhood experiences in their lives, and sometimes even more than that. And they come with a lot of baggage. And so one of the things that these relationships that develop between the younger and older fathers help the younger fathers to do is to heal from that trauma, because what they hear from the older fathers is, young man, I've been where you are. I've experienced what you have. And this is how I dealt with it. And this is how I grew and healed from that same or similar trauma.
Yeah.
But when the young fathers are together with other young fathers in an environment that allows them to be emotionally intimate with one another in safety, you see those masks start to dissolve, and you start to see the real person coming through, much more willing to talk about their challenges around fathering and parenting.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to the idea of being able to see yourself or see examples of yourself be represented in the space. I think it's really important, which is kind of one of the main points of especially our community, is creating a space where you can watch videos, you can read articles, you can connect with other young parents across the country who may share similar experiences to you. They may have similar challenges or similar successes. They may have similar goals, things like that. And that way you can then see, yourself in somebody else, and it'll help you to connect. Another thing that you've been talking a lot about is mentorship. And I think that is so important. Like Divine said, for some young parents, it does feel different. Mentorship looks sometimes like being parented, right, by a stranger. And in other cases, mentorship looks like companionship and being able to have somebody kind of walk through the journey of life with you. And so as we kind of navigate what mentorship looks like, I think it's really important for us as in, an organization, and for other organizations to understand that our approach to mentorship, our approach to sharing information and connecting with young parents has to be really sensitive. Like you said, it has to be trauma informed. We also like to say it has to be healing centered, and being able to address the fact that young parents may be at different points in their mentorship journey or in their parenting journey. And so we never want to come from a place of all knowing. We always want to come from a place of partnership. And so thank you for shedding light on that, because I think it holds those working with young parents accountable to being authentic in their programming and not just spewing a lot of information that may not
Yeah,
even be processed.
and I think one of the biggest challenges that many organizations face in recruiting fathers is the fact that for most human service organizations, their staff are female dominated. And so a lot of times, not even seeing a picture, a face of another man can be off-putting. And so the more organizations can do to recruit male employees and also male volunteers, the more likely they are to be able to, successfully recruit young fathers into their programs and services. Now, I say that with this caveat. We're often asked, well, can a woman facilitate a fatherhood program as well as a man? And our answer is always yes, if she's a good facilitator. Because one of the benefits for young fathers of being in a program that's facilitated by, let's say, a young mother is they enjoy the female perspective, and so they can ask her questions about raising children and parenting from a female perspective, and they benefit from it. And we often advise people to, if they can, to have a co-facilitation team with a man and a woman as a part of that team that can provide a really well-rounded kind of experience and perspective for young dads.
Yeah. Thank you for shedding light on that as well. So I want to pivot just a little bit, because we've talked about kind of internal influences, we've talked about family influences, we've talked about organization influences, but I really want to kind of dive into the influences of media as well. And I know we touched on this just a little bit before, but again, the things that we see every day in media, and this the space that social media has become. For some, it is a space where they feel like they can safely express themselves. For many others, they don't feel safe in the space of social media, especially as a young parent, because of the stigma and the judgment and all the things. And I can imagine, especially as a young father, right? Seeing all the messages around what it looks like to be a father, seeing the comments and the direct messages and the posts and all the things, they're not always super encouraging. So I would love for us to talk about how you feel social media has influenced fatherhood positively, negatively, everything in between? And with the rise of AI, do you see any shifts in parenting and the
Sure,
challenges that young parents have?
sure. So, I mean, there are different ways in which men and women, young men, young women, engage with social media. So there are certain platforms that young men use more than women do, and vice versa. I would say, generally speaking, that there's less of an influence of social media on fathering than there is on mothering.
Mm.
That there's a lot more um, information and misinformation out there for mothers than there is for fathers. But when it comes to parenting in general, there's a lot of misinformation in social media. In fact, just a couple of months ago, I participated on a panel for the National Parenting Education Network. So this is the national network of parenting educators. And they invited me on and two other experts on because they wanted to talk about this very thing. What's happening in social media? What's accurate? What's not accurate? And the research is pretty clear that what is being shared in social media by and large around parenting, mothering, and fathering is extremely inaccurate. And so what young fathers need to do and all young parents need to do is to look at information they're receiving from social media around parenting with skepticism. And to really look to research-based, evidence-based sources of information, which you may find some of that on social media, but in general, you're not going to find it. You're going to need to find it through reputable organizations. So, for example, I just recently released a book called The 24/7 Dad, 12 Habits of Competent Fathers. And one of the things I talk about is for fathers, and this is true of fathers of any age, when you want information and you need to increase your knowledge and skill based around being a better father, there are certain sources that are really important to turn to and certain sources that are important to avoid. I think that, one of the things we have seen, though, in fathering is a rise in what we call daddy podcasters.
Mm.
So just like you have moms out there doing podcasts around mothering, you have an increase in podcasters who are dads talking about fathering. They basically fall into two buckets. One is those who are focused on research and providing evidence-based information to fathers, and they often invite experts on in a variety of fields, work-family balance, how to discipline your children effectively, how to care for your own mental and physical health. Whereas most of the more popular podcasts are just a bunch of guys sitting around a campfire, just cutting up and talking about being a better dad. And so, while they may provide some, helpful information every now and then from a personal perspective, they're not looking at what the evidence suggests is the best approach for addressing, fathering in general or specific challenges that fathers may have. The other thing that we discussed in this panel is the rise of AI. As you all are undoubtedly aware, I mean, AI can be helpful to an extent, but because of large language models' tendency to hallucinate, there's something called, there's research that's come out now that shows that large language models try to please the user. It may present information that's not accurate in a way to please and not challenge the user. In order to use AI effectively in parenting, and I talk about this in the book as well, you have to become very familiar with how to prompt AI tools and also how to confirm what you're getting. So, for example, when you're prompting an AI tool, let's say you're using ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the more popular models, you have to learn to be very specific with your prompting and to always ask it to cite sources that then when you get the results, you go and you verify those sources. I can't tell you how many times I've used AI and I've gone to verify the sources and they don't exist, or the interpretation of the AI in terms of what these sources are saying or providing is also inaccurate. So, so what I talk about in the book are some very basic kind of low risk ways to use AI that can be helpful in parenting, but you have to be very careful. And as I advise fathers in the book, I basically say, look, if you are not comfortable using AI to help you to be a better father or parent, just don't use it.
That's so valuable. It's like being
Yeah.
able to
So I,
your source.
yeah. So I do think that one of the challenges that young parents in general face today that older parents didn't is with the rise of AI and the temptation to use it as a shortcut to learning about effective parenting.
I love that. And I mean, anyone can use that piece of nugget, honestly. But
Yeah.
if you're parenting, especially because a lot of the time young parents are seeking information, education, have questions, how to do this, how to navigate that, and to just go to a platform, hoping to get, the right positive impact and guidance to just being told anything and being vulnerable enough to just take any information that's given to you and just wanting the best
Right.
hopes, trusting that. And
Because
so,
I do want to mention one thing, and one danger is that, and this is really relevant for younger parents because they would tend to have younger children by and large, is parents are turning more and more to AI to help diagnose uh, ailments that their children may be having. And so you have to be really careful in doing that. I mean, call your pediatrician first.
yes.
Call your pediatrician first or your family doctor, get their input. If you want to use AI to get a general idea of what might be happening, okay, but don't make a definitive decision about how to act until you've interacted with a reputable medical source for that guidance.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of just speaking on the rise of media as a whole, you've mentioned there being like a rise of these daddy podcasters. And I mean, we all see it. And so I'm kind of curious of why do you think there's just so many growing conversations of being a dad right now? And then also, how can young dads, navigate the importance of utilizing those as a resource or kind of knowing when this is not a beneficial source? It's because I know you
Yeah.
label it as different buckets.
Well, yeah. So I would, definitely say, if you're interested in getting information through podcasts, which a lot of guys listen to, I mean, they listen to sports podcasts, business podcasts, all sorts of podcasts. And I think that's great. Go ahead and make sure that if you're listening to daddy podcasts, that you're listening to a podcast where they are focused on bringing you research-based guidance. It's fine if you want just the entertainment value of listening to a bunch of guys around a campfire cutting up and having a good time, because that can be therapeutic in some ways. But it's really important if you're looking for specific information to get it from research-based sources. I think, this is one of the other challenges that we see young fathers facing and young men in general today is because of technology and gaming and the ability to basically use technology to escape from life. There is a tendency to look for information in those technology-based sources and not connect with other fathers and other men. So, we definitely have, and that could be a whole nother podcast, right? We've got a crisis in this country, particularly in young men who are isolating from life. And there's an increased depression and anxiety as well. And we're seeing this with young women as well, but much more in the case of young men and fathers. And so, being able to, and being willing as a young father to get out and connect with other fathers is really important. If for no other reason than just mutual support and the ability to, exchange information and connect in a human way, which you can't do that um, through technology and media. I mean, we can connect, for example. I mean, if the three of us were in person, we'd be connecting in a different way than we are through technology. So that's really important for young fathers to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as we pivot, as we continue on our conversation and kind of weed through these different things, I would love if you could give a nugget of wisdom, a piece of advice for young dads who may be listening, who may be in this space where they are feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling alone. They're feeling like they, are facing isolation, or they're navigating co-parenting relationships that are hard, or they're navigating work-life balance that's hard. Um, what would you want them to hear? What would you want them to know about themselves as parents and their ability?
Yeah, I would say that you have the strength in you to be a great father. You have that ability, and this is one of the things that we work on, and uh, is an integral part of our programs at National Fatherhood Initiative, is that they are structured from a strengths-based perspective. So they don't look at a father and say, "Oh, this is where you're deficient." They look at a father initially and say, "This is where you're strong. Yes, you've got challenges that you need to address, but let's figure out, how do I leverage my strengths?" And so every father, regardless of who he is, has strengths that he can leverage and build on and start to have some success. And so that's the first thing that I would say, is that you have the strength within you. At the same time, in order to leverage those strengths most effectively, you need to connect with other fathers. So look for support networks, support groups in your community. Most communities in the US these days, particularly urban communities, have fatherhood programs. It's just a matter of, going to a search engine, or you can even go to an AI LLM, but I would say go to a search engine, and, search for that kind of assistance in your community. If not, you can at least find a parenting support group that will have moms and dads together. So you need to get and be willing to get into that kind of supportive environment in order to grow as a father. The other part that I would encourage young fathers to really focus on is developing your confidence as a father. So when we look at all of the factors, and I've been doing this work for more than 30 years, when we look at the research and what it says about what are the factors that best predict whether a father is involved in the lives of his children, confidence, or what researchers call self-efficacy, has emerged as one of the, if not the most important factors. So it's important that as a father, you experience wins. So just like in sports, and I use this analogy in my book, a baseball manager will often tell his team, look, it's more important that we win two games out of this 3-game series than win all 3. Because over the course of a long season, that's what you want to accomplish. And if you do that, you're going to be in the playoffs, and then you have a chance to, make it to the championship. But if you don't accept the fact that you're going to have failures as a father, and I always tell people this: you're going to screw up your kids. You're going to screw up your kids. It's a matter of accepting that and making sure that you don't make the same mistake twice. That's going to help you be successful. So have winning streaks, small wins, and focus on things that you can do that are realistic. Because depending upon a young father's situation, let's say he is not living with the mother, and the mother is engaging in that gatekeeping behavior that I mentioned before, it's important to focus on things that you can do that are realistic to be involved in the lives of your children. Don't set yourself up for failure by trying to do something that is just not going to happen, perhaps because the mother is not going to allow that to happen. But the final piece of advice, and I know you asked for one, but I'm going to give you quite a few others, is focus on the quality of the relationship with your co-parents. That's really important, because not just because of the gatekeeping behavior, but because that relationship is the blueprint that your child is going to look at and model their own relationships after. And not just their romantic relationships, but also relationships professionally. I mean, seeing how their parents interact and whether they respect and love one another, and I use love in the kind of the broad sense, not necessarily the romantic sense, is really important. So developing that high quality co-parenting relationship is another factor.
Thank you so much. I think all of your insight today has been super valuable for organizations, for the young dads listening, and even as a young mother myself, kind of just being able to hear the other side of things, I think is super important to take in and reflect on. So thank you for
You're
that.
welcome.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to highlight your book that you just recently published. I know you've mentioned it briefly in the podcast, but I would love for you to just share a little bit more about it, where people can find it, and
Sure.
where others can also connect and find Fatherhood Initiative as well.
Sure. Let me start with National Fatherhood Initiative. So, fatherhood.org, it's a real simple URL. And so, if any of your listeners are with organizations that serve families in any capacity, that's what we're here for. We're here to serve you and to help you build the capacity to effectively engage fathers. We also have fathersource.org, which is our e-commerce store where organizations can go and acquire our evidence-based and evidence-informed programs and other resources. As far as the book is concerned, it's called The 24/7 Dad, 12 Habits of Confident Fathers. This is a research-backed book that helps dads develop 6 cross-cultural characteristics of effective fathering. Those being self-awareness, self-care, fathering skills, parenting skills, and relationship skills. And it helps them to develop 12 habits that build those traits. Habits are the essence of good fathering. Because what we eventually want to do as fathers is be able to put our fathering on autopilot. And the only way that you can do that is to develop habits that you repeat without having to think about them. So there are 2 habits for each of the 6 characteristics. And I use a model in the book called active participation, meaning that there are lots of exercises and things that fathers can do that help them to develop those habits. So it's not as if they just sit there and read the book, but they're actively engaged with the content. And it's very easy structure, very easy to follow. Folks can find out more about it at confidentfathers.com. In addition to the book, I've designed a whole bunch of free resources that can help dads work their way through the book, like a worksheet and some graphics and some other things as well. And those can also be used by professionals who are mentoring fathers with the book. So a lot of our partners at National Fatherhood Initiative have already committed to using the book themselves to enhance the programming that they're currently delivering. So it's available on Amazon. Barnes and Nobles across the country are carrying it. Bookshop.org. If you like to support independent booksellers, which I'm sure some of your audience members like to do, go to bookshop.org. You can actually get the book for a lower price than pretty much anywhere else. And part of the proceeds will go back to support independent booksellers. And actually, half of the royalties of the book will go to support the work of National Fatherhood Initiative. So definitely get out there and buy it. And, it's just a great resource for any dad of any age, but it's really going to be helpful for young fathers, because if you get the book now as a young father and develop those habits now at an early age, I mean, I wish this information had been available when I was a young dad. I would have loved to have had this type of a tool.
Absolutely. I love it. I'm so excited for our young fathers and others listening to dive in and to really learn and to grow. We are going to tag all the information on this video and in the description if you are listening to the audio, so that you all can get your copy, and also so you all can connect with Fatherhood Initiative and just learn more about what they're doing over there, learn more about what fatherhood looks like in this new landscape. I would love for us to end our conversation today with just like a hope or something that you're feeling very positive or very excited about the future of fatherhood. Are there things
Sure.
that you feel like, I don't know, are coming up, or we're on a trajectory that looks hopeful?
I've been doing this work for more than 3 decades, and I've seen a rapid increase in the number of organizations and communities that are helping fathers specifically,
Mhm.
as opposed to just parents generally. That's given me a lot of hope. But some of the research that I mentioned earlier with younger fathers putting much more of their personal identity into based on their effectiveness as a father. But I'm also, I also see this in my personal life as well. So I'm the father of two girls. They're 31 and 28. My older daughter and her husband have a 2-year-old daughter who's absolutely wonderful, of course. And they're expecting their second child. And my son-in-law is very involved in his daughter's lives. He's a traveling musician. He's actually in Europe right now. But when he is home and when he's on the road, he is constantly thinking about his kids. It's really wonderful to see. But I was very involved in the lives of my daughters growing up, and so I knew a lot of their friends. And now I'm seeing the male friends that they had growing up becoming fathers themselves, and how dedicated they are to being involved fathers. So I'm seeing that, and we see it statistically. There's just an increase in children growing up with their fathers that I mentioned earlier. There's an increase in children growing up with their married parents, which is another important predictor of father involvement. But there's also, just the stories that I'm seeing and the stories that I'm hearing and experiencing personally that give me a lot of hope. And honestly, I hope that one day there's not a need for a national fatherhood initiative, that we end up working ourselves out of a job.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I don't think my staff would like hearing that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a hope I've always had. Growing up without an involved father in my life is the driver for me doing this work, and I just want to see as few children experience what I did as a child as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, to just hear the data itself is so hopeful because I didn't know that all these things were on the rise as far as like children witnessing their parents married and fathers being in their life. So I think just hearing that is such a motivator as well, just knowing that it's happening. We may not hear about it or know about it, but it's possible. People have the capacity and capability. And, it's nice to see the positive changes in the world at a time like this.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged for the work that organizations are doing. I'm encouraged for just what the future of our children look like. And I think it's going to be really, really bright. So we thank you so, so much again for joining our conversation, for being on today, for talking about all of the things from manhood and fatherhood and stigma and all the things, and all the way to social media and podcasting and your book. And so I feel like this has been a really, really fruitful conversation. And I hope that others that are listening are encouraged. I hope that organizations listening have learned something and are dedicated to this work, because it takes a village. We can't do it in
Yeah,
isolation.
and I encourage your readers to spread the word about Yup. I mean, because you guys are doing fantastic work. It's really important that young parents have a voice, and you guys are providing that platform. And the more young parents learn about Yup's work, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We really, really, really do. Um, yeah, so until next time, you all, we will have to continue this conversation. We'll have to have Christopher back on again to talk about the other things that we didn't touch on today. But until next time, thank you all for listening, for watching, and we'll connect on the airways.
National Fatherhood Initiative was founded in 1994 to reverse the nation's destructive trend toward father absence. The National Fatherhood Initiative's mission is to increase father involvement by equipping human service organizations and communities with the father engagement training, programs, and resources they need to be father inclusive. Their vision is that all human service organizations and communities are proactively father inclusive so that every child has an involved, responsible, and committed father. For more information on the National Fatherhood Initiative, visit www.fatherhood.org.
If you enjoyed the Up podcast, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment.
and visit youngunitedparents.org for the information, community, and resources young moms and dads need to thrive.